Chapter 3, New Home. Frankie. An ache formed in Frankie's throat when he stared down at Dave with his one working eye. The terrorist-turned-hero lay in a private room at Hidden City's small hospital complex. The man had lost a lot of blood. He whined as the doctor slit into his shoulder wound and pulled out a bullet with a pair of forceps. After that, she applied more antiseptic and dressed it. The wooden door squeaked on its hinges. Sarita entered and bowed slightly, her freshly shaven head reflecting red from the light above. "You're a hero, Frankie." She nodded at Dave. "Who is he?" "Dave. He's the actual hero. I'd be dead meat if it wasn't for him, and the captives would still be in that stinking camp." He knew Sarita and Dave had a history, but the doctor didn't. "Many say Dave was friends with the communists," Sarita said. "Would you suggest I tell them?" Dave quizzed as the doctor set up a drip and forced a cannula into his vein. "That will be enough now, Dr. Leahy. Thank you," Sarita said. "Just one more thing, sister." The doctor pulled out a vial from her bag and attached it to the drip until all the liquid transferred. "Intravenous antibiotics." The woman packed her medical bag, then left. "Are there any spy cams here?" Dave asked. "In some places, not in this room." Sarita took 3 steps forward and clasped his hands. Frankie shuffled to one side of the bed. "It's good to see you. I always wondered when you'd make the right decision." "You accept me here?" he asked. "I begged you many times to come and settle. You should feel proud of yourself for rescuing so many." "Proud is not something I'll ever feel, since the communists took me away from my slaughtered family all those decades ago." "But that's the past." Sarita tilted her bone-white face towards Frankie, and all the tiny hexagrams in her eyes looked watery, like shiny black ink. "How many did he rescue?" "Dunno." Frankie did a rough calculation. There were 6 tanks, but Dave's friends blew one up, killing the occupants and those clinging to the top. So there were about 10 people in each, 1 and 6 or 7 around the outside. Five times 16 is 96, about 100? "Mayhaps, lad, mayhaps," Dave said. "And is it true the soldiers would have killed you if Dave hadn't come?" Frankie nodded. "We'll be as honest as we can to everyone," she said. "Tell them you took Frankie under your wing when you found him in the slum over the ocean. That part will all be true." "But do you know how I found the lad?" Dave cringed and shook his head. "It was after I gunned down hundreds of tourists and locals in a sky mall. The lad was busking there." Frankie rubbed his hand on a pant leg while noticing Dave didn't mention him busking with a sparry cat. With luck, little Jimmy would stop Ollie from barking by keeping him company at home. Sarita brushed a palm over her head. "I know, Frankie already told me, but what about the sparry cat?" Frankie froze. He'd forgotten he'd told her about his pet. "Left him with the commies," Dave said. "Good. I'll say..." Here we go. "Good. I'll say you rescued Frankie and the sparry cat from a slum. I won't say you were a terrorist." "They wouldn't accept me if they knew." She nodded. "There'd be a rebellion." Frankie's voice came out strained when he said, "Sing's sister knows. That's why she burned me." He instinctively brought his fingertips to the bandage over his melted face and blind eye. Sarita sucked in a sharp breath. "Did the doctor see to your eye and burn when you returned?" Frankie nodded. "She gave me antibiotics, said it got infected over the last 2 days, said my eyesight might never return to that one." Dave clenched his hands into fists. "That little bitch. It weren't your fault. That burn and your blindness is my doing." "Don't say that." Frankie's heartbeat raced. "You rescued her brother. His capture wasn't your fault. You repaid all your debts. You rescued me and 100 others. Please," Sarita curled her bony white fingers around the bed rail. "Let's discuss what we'll tell them." She folded her cloak around her as if cold. "You'll be honest about everything except what Dave did for the communists." "But what about Isa?" Frankie said. "She saw Dave shooting the captives before Zing rescued her." "I'll talk to her," Sarita said. "What can we say your job was?" "An agent," Dave suggested. No one will trust you if you tell them that." How about saying he was some kind of missionary? Dave's jaw clenched. Commies don't follow religions, lad. Okay, Frankie said. Not a religious missionary, but a communist one. You can say you went to Ostbox in order to help bring poor orphans back to Vorta. Tell them I went all the way only to bring you and your sparry cat back over the seas. Who else knows I'm a terrorist? Only us and Isa, Sarita said. Probably Zing too, Frankie added. You can say the Xianese authorities discovered your ploy, so you had to escape with me back to Vorta. I'll say I was eager to come because I was a starving slum kid. That part's true. My parents had already died. Frankie felt numb and let out a strangled sob. Tell them I had no one left. Dave patted Frankie's arm. It's all right, lad. This is a good place as any to converse. Sarita pressed a button on the wall panel. Security, this is Sister 5. Please locate Isa Featherborn. Yes, ma'am. There was a 2-second pause before the voice spoke again. She's at home. Ask her to come immediately to private room 3 in the medical centre. Rightly so, ma'am. Sarita pulled her hand away from the wall and nodded. Better to discuss it now. Get it over with. Not long afterwards, a knock sounded at the door. Sarita opened it. Hello, Isa. She stepped back so the girl could enter. When Frankie had first come to Hidden City, he couldn't tell the difference between Boluvians. The only obvious feature was their pigmentation. They were coal black or bone white, but snooping at them through his right eye now, Sarita and Isa were very different. It wasn't just the fact that Sarita had shaved all her hair off and was a couple of feet taller, but their large black eyes were sloped at different angles, and Isa's face was heart-shaped, whereas Sarita's was longer. Isa froze when she faced Dave. It's you. Keep your voice down. Sarita shut the door. I brought you here because you saw this man assassinating prisoners at the concentration camp. You mustn't mention a word of it to anyone. Singh already knows, she said. Where is he? Isa's chin dropped and a deep crease formed between her thin white brows. In the medical ward, of course. Those barbarians broke his legs. He's worse off than this killer, yet this killer gets a private room. Only because we need privacy to discuss matters. What you know must remain behind sealed lips. Once you and your stepbrother agree, this man will be escorted into the ward with everyone else. If I'm not allowed to say anything, yet must discuss it with Singh, how can we communicate? Sarita pressed the button on the panel once more. Nurse? A feminine voice chimed through the speaker. Yes? It's Sister 5, calling from Medical Suite 3. I believe a boy called Singh Featherborn is in the ward. I'd like him brought here so we can discuss something. Difficult, Sister 5. Both his legs and ankles are broken. Do you have a wheelchair? We do, but I don't understand why he must be moved for a simple conversation. It's a conversation which must remain private. Okay. Can you come soon? He's presently sleeping. I'll have to wake him. It's not easy. He's had a high dose of morphine. Please wake him. As they waited, Isa glowered at Dave. I saw you with Frankie. I saw what you did to all those people. You killed children. Dave's face changed from white to red as he stared at his feet poking up from the end of the bed. I know I've done wrong. I'll never forgive myself for it. I should die. I agree. Sarita gripped Isa's wrist. And that's not what's going to happen. Dave may have done terrible things, but he's a changed man. Don't forget he rescued your brother. He wasn't going to. He only did that because Frankie assaulted a guard. He did it for Frankie, not for the captives. But he rescued them. As Zarita released Isa's wrist, 2 filmy lids extended from the corners of each eye and curtained together in the centres. She inhaled a sharp breath, blew it out slowly, and reopened her black eyes. You should be grateful and release your anger, Isa. That's easy for you to say. You didn't watch the communist soldiers gun down your parents. Please, Isa. Frankie's chest caved in. Don't tell anyone about Dave. Everyone knows he's a communist. They can know that, just not... A knock at the door halted the conversation. Come in, Sarita said. A Renidian nurse pushed Singh in a wheelchair and narrowed her eyes at Sarita. He's very weak. I hope this won't take too long. I'm really not happy about waking my patient, and that will be all. Thank you. Sarita nodded and the nurse left. Thank you for rescuing us, Singh said to Dave. I'm just sorry I hadn't done it sooner, lad, Dave said to the black Boluvian in the wheelchair. They were going to break my spine, but you came before that could happen. They wanted to know where I came from. They know there's a hideout with Beluvians somewhere. They said they knew our type came from underground. They said I was a demon. Racist bigots. Isa crossed her arms and stared at the ceiling. Don't thank me for rescuing you. Dave gave Zing a sidelong glance. Frankie risked his life, even after your sister blinded him. This time Isa glared at her shoes. Thank you, Frankie, Zing said. I mean it sincerely. He fooled me, Dave smiled. I never in a million years knew what his true intentions were. Zarita arched over and tapped Zing's shoulder. I brought you in because you and Isa mustn't mention a word of what Dave did before he rescued you. Sweat beaded on Zing's brow and his head drooped. He was obviously in a lot of pain. They mustn't know he was a killer. A communist is fine, but they mustn't know what his role was. Frankie told Zing about his missionary idea. Beads of sweat streamed down Zing's black cheeks and neck. I need more morphine. Zarita pressed the button. Nurse? Yes, Mum. Zing's ready to return to his bed. The door burst open as the nurse barged her way inside and took hold of the handlebars. She offered no eye contact as she rolled him backwards and out of the room. She didn't shut the door behind her, but muttered to herself angrily. Hopefully you won't be lonely at home on your own. Zarita pivoted around to face Frankie, though he couldn't tell for sure where she was looking because there were no whites to her eyes. She rested a thin hand on his arm. Dave tells me you've adopted a little brother. Not adopted, but I said he could stay with me. His name's Jimmy. She veered towards Isa. Would you like to stay with me while your brother heals? What I really want is my father and stepmother back. They shouldn't have ever died. I must avenge their deaths. There's a Mayleedian Marine here. Frankie's palm pressed against his mouth as warmth flushed his face. He'd promised the strange-looking young man to keep his identity secret, but Zarita's mouth formed an O shape. What are you talking about? The lad must be having visions, Dave said. Are you both going to lie to my face? Tell me about this Marine. We promised not to tell, Frankie said. In return, he said he'd keep Dave's secret. I won't whisper a word of it, but if he's living in my city, I'd like to monitor his activity. Dave nodded. He's only a young lad, the same age as Frankie, 18 or so. Says he works for the Mayleedians. It felt like Frankie's insides were vibrating. He turned his hand into a laser gun. What? Yeah, that lad's got some high-tech body parts. It wouldn't surprise me if he's partly robot. Really? That's right, Dave said. He helped us, mind you. Frankie bit down on his smile. He blew up a tank with a blue ray of light. Don't forget the fighter jets, lad. Frankie nodded, excited. He shot down 3 fighter jets. If it wasn't for him, we'd all be dead or getting tortured by the Dawn Republic. Frankie fidgeted and cleared his throat. He and that boy had killed Dave's terrorist friends. That lad did it at hyperspeed too, Dave said. I ain't ever seen someone aim and shoot a weapon so quickly, 3 times in a row. It wouldn't be easy for any normal Tom, Dick or Harry shooting down fast-moving targets like that. I don't know what planet he's from, Frankie said. I've seen no one like him before, not even in the Sky Malls. What colour skin does he have? Zarita asked. He was a Sax, Dave said. A kind of yellowy cream skin, Frankie added, but his cheeks were rosy. Don't know if he came directly from Mayleeda or Nerthus, Dave snorted. Saxes come from Nerthus, lad, but they get around with space travel these days. You're right, though. He won't be able to hide here for long. Ain't no Saxes in Eden City, are there, love? Zarita blushed. No, none. Doubt there are any on the whole of planet Arceus, Dave added. I couldn't tell you about that. He was definitely a Sax, Dave said. Yellow hair, but not Svad yellow, oh no. His hair was the colour of sun-ripened corn. He has blue eyes, Frankie added. I've seen no one with blue eyes before. Did he have light-intensifying suction lenses or glasses? Isa added. Frankie shrugged at Dave. No, the terrorist rubbed his cheek. He must have difficulty seeing under the light of our infrared sun, Isa said. Frankie hooted. Not if he's a cyborg. Chapter 4. A Wishful Spy. Agent Haru. From between clouds, Agent Haru surveyed the land. A family of hikers had set up camp just 100 metres from Bosgio Falls. He'd been watching them from his hoverboard for an hour and was getting frustrated. If Major Dondor didn't insist on locking away his stealth suit in his vault, Haru wouldn't have to deal with dumb situations like this. Relief washed over him when the parents and their 2 kids left the tent and followed a path towards the nearest village. He adjusted his light-intensifying bionic vision and watched as they rounded the crest of the hill. One last scan of the terrain proved no one would witness him descend. Once outside the cave near the gorge, he took all the relevant turns through the network of tunnels to arrive at his cavern. He threw a couple of glow balls into the air, not bothering to adjust them to white, seeing as his eyes were already set on red sun mode. After untying the container from his hoverboard, he studied the lock. It was rigged with a bomb. The merchandise must have been super confidential to be fitted with that. That was risky and stupid. The explosive could be powerful enough to puncture a hole in a space station module. His throat sealed shut as he plopped on the ground and held his head in his hands. He needed money so badly. Without it, he'd never get back to Mayleeda with his son, Akio. Discovering what Sissia was working on could provide him with a ludicrous opportunity, whether he sold it to Dawn Republic or the Mayleedian Military. The one piece of stealth Major Dondor was kind enough to provide him with was the size of a dishcloth and reserved in the cavern. He stroked the bumpy rock beside the wall and fingered the material before using it to stick to one side of the box. It wasn't big enough, but would have to do. After leaving the gorge and ascending into the sunset, his hoverboard whir was more subdued with the lighter load. He'd see Major Dondor and spend the night in his luxurious mansion. Perhaps he could get the man to reconsider lending out the stealth, but it would be hard to convince the Major when Haru kept Hidden City and his curiosity about the cargo undisclosed. Agent Haru steepled his fingers against his lips and sat opposite Major Dondor at the heavy oak desk. A scientist typed at a small computer from an armchair at the other side of the room. Sunlight blazed through the window, lighting up the Major's hideous scar. His brown skin didn't scar well. It wasn't surprising, considering the force of the machete Dondor had fended off after rescuing the president from the assassin. Dondor didn't hide his milky blind eye with a patch and seemed to be proud of the bumpy silver line which dissected his right eyelid during its journey down his face to his chin. The large man crossed his arms over his muscled chest and nodded towards Haru's drink. Haru sipped the vintage red wine, relishing its flavour as he swirled it around his mouth and swallowed. "It's very good." He raised the glass to his nose and sniffed the pungent aroma. Dondor chuckled. "Only the best for my solitary cyborg. Won't you reconsider handing me my stealth for the space station?" "Never." "But why?" "I can snoop around better." "There's nothing to snoop around for. You're a good aerospace technician and have time allocated to satellite imagery. That's an order from the president himself." "But imagine what I could do with the suit." "No." The Major gestured for the scientist to come over to the desk. "Explain what he needs to know, Dr. Alazand." The elderly scientist... Oh, he's not elderly. Sorry. The fragile scientist cleared his throat and his hand tremoured uncontrollably. Agent Haru frowned with sympathy and offered him his seat. No, I couldn't." "Please," Haru said. The scientist sat and peered up at the agent. "The capitalists mustn't detect our plutonium production reactors or the gaseous diffusion from uranium enrichment plants. This is a vast project President Isleworth's concentrating his resources on. You must keep it under cover." Major Dondor sipped his wine and gazed out the window. "You and your invisibility suit. I don't know what you're up to, but we need your attention on the job at hand. I don't know how you expect to get away with invisibility in such cramped confinements anyway." Haru pictured golden light emanating from Sissia's opened box, but she wouldn't let him know a thing, and he'd never find out without that suit. "How about a drone?" "We're not as well equipped as our foreign adversaries," Dr. Alazand said. "The biggest drone Dawn Republic has is the size of a tank, and the smallest is the size of a small child." Dondor growled at Haru. "Your suit's staying here. It's valuable. If there are other agents on the space station who catch sight of it, they could unveil your intentions." "Why come to that conclusion? Everyone knows I served the Mayleedians, and I said no. Dondor's already squeaky voice rose a pitch. He nodded. I'm going to change that. Okay. Why come to that conclusion when... I said no. Dondor's already squeaky voice rose a pitch. He nodded at Dr. Alazand. Give it to him. The scientist extracted an electronic device from his pocket. Take this. After hacking into the satellite processor at the space station, use it. Haru took it and eyed the device. Will it modify the pictures the satellite took? Dr. Alazand shook his head. It will replace the data. Data detecting vapor plumes from our cooling towers, warm water discharge from the reactors into watercourses, elevated temperatures of roofs of gaseous diffusion plants will all be erased and replaced. That makes more sense than changing the lens on the satellite. Haru chuckled. Dondor's cackle was high-pitched for such a giant of a man. After the scientist left, Haru sipped his wine again as a flush of warmth tingled through his cheeks. Why did so many Jurgens have to be allergic to alcohol? He needn't look in the mirror to know his once golden face was now a shade of beetroot. Are you sure you know how to use it? Major Dondor asked. Haru opened an interface in his palm and tapped away at some diagrams to access the information in his mind. He closed his eyes and viewed the instructions for installation. Yep, I can do it. Good, because fabricating those satellite images is of top priority. Later that evening, Haru took advantage of the sauna, steam room, and icy plunge pool in Dondor's mansion. He then had a 3-course gourmet meal like nothing he'd get to dine on elsewhere, let alone the space station. But despite the extravagance, his frustration wouldn't loosen his muscles. What was Professor Sissia hiding from him? Having a sexual relationship with a Bluvian scientist for 6 months wasn't enough to unlock her secrets. The Dawn Republic had rubbish technology. He should have stolen a bunch of gadgets from the Mayleedian headquarters before they arrested him for murder. 3 hours before dawn, Haru left Pascata City and headed for Bosgio in the north of the Marfar province. After collecting Professor Sissia's merchandise from the cave, he glided west to Diplox, where Artheus International Aviation was situated. When he arrived at AIA's launch pad, an elderly Mayleedian woman with milky yellow eyes and a wrinkled white skin ushered him into the rocket's external elevator, leading to the capsule at the top. But my cargo. She slipped her bony fingers between her lips and whistled before stretching out her palm. Lawrence will heft that for ya. I'll be needing your hover. Haru sighed and allowed the vehicle to fold into a neat metal square before handing it to her. A large man heaved the chest and carried it to the elevator. When the rocket arrived in orbit, security collected Haru from his module in a Shepard Station spacecraft and left the transportation vessel to float in orbit before its descent back to the launch pad. Agent Haru entered Docking Bay 5 in the technicians department of Shepard Station. In microgravity, he nudged the cargo through first. Even though it was weightless, the load was still dense. The metal box had sharp corners, so he had to treat it with care. He nodded at colleagues as he passed through modules. Floating through the compartments with the cargo was tricky, but only he had been sent for the job. Even the fifth sister of Hidden City had refused to tell him what the cargo contained. Professor Sissia was just as stubborn, although they had been in an intimate relationship for the past 6 months. As he scanned his iris and hand into the identification pad on the outer wall of the microbiology department, he bit the inside of his cheek. Professor Sissia opened the door and attached the box to a side panel. Thank you, darling. He floated forward for a kiss as he stared at her black eyes, each the size of a rice bowl. Accustomed to seeing his multiple reflections in the honeycomb segments, her alien face no longer perturbed him, but she pecked him quicker than he had hoped. Before grinning and darting towards her box, she stroked bone-white fingers over the surface of the container. Are you going to open it? In front of you? Why not? You know it's confidential. Despite his pounding heartbeat, he controlled his tone. Then why did you send me to Hidden City? That was your idea. You're the one who suggested it. I would have been quite happy to go there alone. He offered her a weak smile. She was right. Thank you so much for fetching this safely, though. Was Zarita okay with you coming to collect it? I guess so. He shrugged. We didn't chat for long. How about your son? Shh. What? She darted around. No one's listening. Don't ever talk about Akio. Sorry. She nodded tightly. Anyway, I've got some really important experiments to observe and data to collect. Not going to invite me in for a cup of tea? Are you good to see me in a couple of hours instead? I'm knackered. Let's have breakfast tomorrow. Okay. When do you start your job in satellite firmware engineering? Tomorrow. Shouldn't you have breakfast with Richard's crew instead? I guess so. It'll make a better impression. The day after Haru returned to Shepard Station, management assigned him to the satellite data center in the Donut's upper quadrant. While the other satellite analysts slept, Haru performed his usual Fei-Gong exercise routine, wearing gravity boots in the satellite Maps module helped. Luckily, his co-worker was a heavy sleeper. Haru could hear Richard's snores vibrating the walls all the way through 3 modules. He secured the airlock between the kitchen and the map room. Should someone wish to enter that module, he'd hear access beforehand. He hacked into the system and plugged in the device which Major Dondor's scientists had bestowed him. The AI would destroy the original uranium detecting images and lay new ones in their place. They'd generate continuously to feed the station with fakes. It was more subtle than taking a craft out to the satellite to switch the lens and raise suspicion, but a warning signal in his bionic eyes indicated the encryption had already been tampered with. He removed the malware and let the raw data stream in from the satellite. Luckily, it was daytime in Osbox. Yellow and red colours shrouded the region where Exoria's power plant was on the capitalist side of the ocean. The colours used to show plutonium and uranium were far denser compared with those colours on the fabricated image he'd erased. When he scanned the map of the Oxbox continent, he froze to the spot. There were even higher levels of the contaminant around the X-land point. He had to let the Major know about this as soon as possible. See, the Major already knows about this, so I don't know what I'm going to do about that. Sorted. After contacting... read that bit again because I changed it a bit. When he scanned the map of the Osbox continent, he froze to the spot. There were even higher levels of the contaminant around the X-land point. He had to let the Major know about this as soon as possible. After contacting Major Dondor via his telepathy device, he followed orders and sent the images across to Dawn Republic's Laboratory for Nuclear Security and Policy. But apparently they already knew about it. Another mole on the space station had already informed them. That was worrying. Haru reinserted the AI. With luck, the culprit wouldn't realise the data had been tampered with a second time. He meditated to clear his mind before going to bed. It took him a while to sleep, but he smiled as he gazed at the stars through the porthole. Although nuclear war scared him, he no longer had to accomplish life-risking missions for the Mayleedians, but a salary from the communist... I'm going to change that a bit, sorry. Although war scared him. He no longer had to accomplish life-risking missions for the Mayleedians, but a salary from the communist government would never buy him a ticket home. To access Sissia's box, he might have to kill her. He was a one-man man, and Akio deserved a better future on Mayleeda Moon. Not this backward planet which orbited a red dwarf. His son had to see the blue sky and the beautiful gas giant which Mayleeda orbited. Let's not say that bit. And the beautiful gas giant, Tushing. Only Sissia and the 5 sisters knew the information he wanted so badly. He had assassinated love interests before, both male and female. Oshun. It took half an hour to reach the bridge, with sweat streaming down her torso and face. This time she wasn't questioned. When she gained access, she exploded in and marched towards Captain Timmy. His eyes widened. Armed guards aimed laser weapons at her. She drew in slow, steady breaths, knowing how risky it would be to blurt that she knew the truth. The conspiracy to kill the weaker gamers and mechanize the rest could be rooted in the highest ranks of the Nerthling Space Marines or even the Mayleedian Interstellar Military. I don't want to stay on this starship any longer. The lines around Captain Timmy's salmon pink eyes smoothed, and he let out a pent-up breath. Oh, an excellent decision. Admiral Marsh is very impressed with your gaming efforts. Once you are closer in orbit, you can communicate directly with Commander Finley. Did Teresa die? Sorry, who? Her sweat turned cold. My friend, Teresa. He didn't even know the young woman's name. Teresa? Captain Timmy peered at a Markazian crew member with red and black striped skin. skin. The woman typed on an interface in her arm. I'm afraid she died after infiltrating a communist agency. Was it an explosion on a submarine? Oshun shivered. The woman fumbled. Yes. Captain Timmy rubbed the nape of his neck. As my crew prepares to launch at 4 times light speed to another system, my second in command will discuss your covert operation at the Arthean International Space Station. Your surgeon will attend and illustrate everything there is to know about your cybernetic implants, most importantly, the telepathy device in your brain. She swallowed tightly and nodded. Oshun waited outside the airlock in Docking Bay 6. Kelly sniffed and opened her arms for an embrace. Oshun accepted, but her limbs remained tight with mortification. How could Kelly stay with knowledge that the Durbar Division was slaughtering teenage Marines? Oshun entered the space shuttle and sat beside a Mayleedian pilot. A communist skull cap concealed most of his white hair. The emblem of Dawn Republic was sewn onto the green material, a red triangle enveloping a yellow sun. Suction lenses protected his small yellow eyes from the white light inside the shuttle. Although Kelly's sobs reverberated through the opened airlock, Oshun didn't look back. Goodbye and good luck, Oshun Musa. Professor Kelly shrieked as the airlocks hissed shut. Put this on. The pilot threw her some green overalls. You know your story? Yep. Ooh, if you don't mind, I'm just going to change this to orange. Yep. Upside down and back to front. I know it well. Who are you? What are you doing? My name's Henrietta Esteve. I'm from South Forta. What town? I was born in Camshore, but moved to the Marfar province when I was 5. Why? Because my father, Professor Esteve, got a job for the Dawn Republic as a nuclear scientist in Pascarta. The capital of Dawn Republic. Very nice. What does your father do now? He applies his insight about nuclear particles to implement operations at nuclear power plants. Why? I don't know. Good. When will we leave? When will we leave? Oshun asked. Soon. Just checking your stories tight. Why were you chosen for Shepherd Station? My father got permission from President Isleworth. He agreed to pay for the entire trip. Where will you be working? In a plant biology module. The study is highly confidential. Come on, you can tell me. I don't even know myself. Good. You're not really a communist, are you? No, I'm a double agent. It sounds dangerous. It is, but it's my life. I have no family to protect. Me neither. Hopefully she'd have much to do on the International Space Station. It would take her mind off her grief. Put that on. There's a compartment out back. Oh, hang on. She hasn't put that on already, has she? Sorry, 1 minute. There's a compartment out back. She eyed the orange overalls. But what will I do with my other clothes? Leave them here. She followed his orders, stripping down to her underwear and pulling the boiler suit over her metallic limbs. After zipping up, she returned to sit in her seat in the cockpit. The man gave her the once-over and nodded. Wear that at all times unless using a private bathroom. The astronauts mustn't see your metal limbs. What about my hands? Did you receive special gloves? Yes, they're in my bag. Won't they be suspicious? No. Where's your bag? She jabbed a thumb over her shoulder. In the cupboard you told me to put it in. Let's go then. Here. He curled over and attached her safety harness. Got your meds? She nodded. Where are they? In my bag. Where in your bag? Her body froze in place. Hidden inside my menstruation rods. His white face remained expressionless but pinkened at the cheeks. Are the rods flushable? Yes. If they weren't, the other astronauts might discover she hadn't started menstruating. She tapped her foot and grimaced. Taking growth inhibitors meant she wouldn't start puberty until her mission was over, the war was over, or she died.